Welcome back. The district is poised to take a big step toward marijuana legalization this month, while city leaders don't seem inclined to go as far as Colorado and Washington State, two states where pot is sold in stores. D.C. will, it appears, decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. In Maryland, the General Assembly is considering legislation that would legalize possession of pot. What the law says and what your employer is willing to allow may be two different things, and that's why we've asked John Mahoney to join us. He's an employment employment law expert at Tully, Rinckey, a law firm based downtown. Good to see you again. Welcome back.
Good to see you, Bruce.
What springs to mind first as we have this national dialogue about marijuana, and as places like the aforementioned Washington, Colorado, and the District of Columbia and Maryland consider or adopt changes?
Well, from an employer perspective, I represent a lot of federal government employees and also agencies. And the issue, especially in the District of Columbia, is how is that going to affect federal employees? If D.C. decriminalizes the possession and use of small amounts of marijuana next week or in early March, as is expected, how is that going to affect the average federal employee? If you work for the Park Service, raking leaves, are you going to be allowed to smoke pot? If you
why wouldn't you? If the local law shifts, what are the considerations?
Well, the issue there is if a person is covered by a security clearance, and most federal employees in the D.C. area are covered by security clearances, especially those who work for DOD and Department of Homeland Security, and the executive order that covers security clearances in the federal government still treats marijuana and other controlled substances as illegal. So you could have a situation where you've got D.C. private residents and employees being allowed to use marijuana, whereas federal and state employees may not be allowed to do so.
And the advice would be very cautious in the decisions you make. Be
very cautious. I think obviously there are public safety concerns with regard to secured federal employees, and even if D.C. and Maryland decriminalize the use of marijuana, if you're a federal employee and you have a security clearance, you cannot smoke marijuana or use any other illegal drugs until the federal government decriminalizes them on a federal level.
And I would assume that that is pretty established from a legal perspective, that something can be a legal activity in terms of local, state, federal, but still banned as a matter of employment policy, either by a private sector or a public sector employer?
Sure. One of the big issues that's still on the table right now with regard to the simple possession of small amounts of marijuana Decriminalization Act, which is the title of the D.C. bill that's pending in the D.C. Council, is Councilmember Orange's amendment, which would make it unlawful for D.C. employers to drug test for marijuana in the District of Columbia if the law becomes legal. And that may raise, frankly, some constitutional issues, which could lead to some court challenges that could bring the issue up to the Supreme Court. It's unclear whether that amendment is going to pass with the bill that's pending, that's supposed to go to vote February 18th or March 4th. But it is right now a concern for a lot of D.C. employers that I represent, that even if D.C. decriminalizes small use of marijuana, can D.C. private employers still drug test? Many have a drug test. Many private employers have drug testing policies, and especially if the employer has something to do with public safety. Certainly, it's clear in the bill that's even pending before the council that if your job involves public safety, you can't, even if it's decriminalized, use marijuana.
What if I have a barber shop and I just don't want people coming in half-baked and then picking up the scissors and going at my customer?
Well, yeah, that's the issue. What is public safety? If you're using, clippers to cut someone's hair and you're high on marijuana, is that a public safety concern?
Or is it just you're going to botch their hair? And
well, that's a big issue too. Obviously, that's very important. But what is public safety and what isn't public safety? Certainly, if you're driving a public vehicle or private vehicle.
Let's take the more easier to defend things like, you're driving for my flower shop and I don't want any impairment, so I'm going to drug test. Let's just say you're an architect. I have a firm. You're one of my architects. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Can I drug test you?
Well, I would argue that any of those jobs that you just mentioned are in fact public safety jobs. If you're designing buildings and for public safety, you don't want them falling down on people. If you're driving a
So
truck,
you're a flower arranger.
I'm a flower arranger in this instance. And the issue is, where do we draw the line? And I think it's going to create a lot of litigation, frankly. I think it's going to create a lot of headaches for DC private employers, not to mention government employers, as to who can legally smoke pot and who can legally not smoke pot.
To what extent is it incumbent on the DC Council, the Maryland Assembly, whomever, to think all these issues through and speak to them in the laws they pass, so that the policy has been deliberated in a hopefully sober fashion, and questions that are likely to come up anticipated, so there's guidance and kind of rules and understandings. How much do they owe us this sort of rigorous analysis?
They really do. I mean, the bottom line is that, the number of people in America who support the legalization of marijuana is rising. It's certainly over 60% in the District of Columbia, over 50% nationally. But we do have to step back and take a really hard look at what does this mean in the real world. Where do we draw the line? If people are driving vehicles for their workplace, we can't have them high on marijuana. If they're involved with children, the teaching of children, certainly not allowed. Certainly if you're dealing with a situation like an architect or a medical doctor or even an attorney, you don't want people practicing professions while under the influence of illegal drugs. So it really is incumbent upon the General Assembly in Maryland and the DC Council to take a hard look at what really should be allowed to go forward.
We only have 45 seconds left. This may be an unfair question to cram into a short period of time. What is known, in terms of what's known about the impact of marijuana on people's cognitive abilities? There's going to be people are going to be grabbing at studies to get a handle on that, right?
Well, sure. I think recently the president and also the deputy drug czar for the Office of National Drug Control Policy have come out in congressional testimony and have admitted that it's no more dangerous than alcohol abuse. But the reality is that it is something that we need to take a look at as a society as we move forward toward legalization.
John Mahoney is an employment law expert at the DC firm Tully, Rinckey. Thanks very much for your time. Great having you here.
Thank you, Bruce.
Such an important topic, timely too.